tomorrow, next Wednesday night. So y'all will arm wrestle over it, or fight, or play rock, paper, scissors, or something, however y'all do it.
Sunday is potluck.
Sunday is potluck, that's back to school potluck. Why do you give me that word?
Miss Linda texted me and said to please have the tables set out tonight for potluck on Sunday.
So we need to set out the tables, guys. After church tonight, we'll set out tables, so Miss Linda can just come in and decorate, not have to set up tables. There are 3 birthday card baskets back there for some very special people in our church. Miss Shirley, Mr. Paul, Giles, is that right?
Yeah, yes.
Giles.
Okay.
Giles.
I had a flashback that might be that J. Giles band. I thought maybe I'd mix it up, Giles or Giles, but anyway, I showed you my names there. Paul Giles or Carolyn. What's Carolyn? Bowen.
I also saw a card from Miss Janet, so apparently her birthday is in August, October. It's October, okay, well, Tracy can move that.
Okay. So if you want to get a head start on the Kansas, you can. But her birthday is not in October. Any other announcements?
We have a couple here who have just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary.
50th wedding anniversary. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Matt's parents.
Oh. That is pretty incredible. 50 years. That'd be good to have that joke with me. So I heard a good joke today. Jeff Oxford told it. I thought it was good. This may be very fitting to y'all's marriage. I don't know. So, but I'm going to use Margaret and I in the joke. Margaret and I have been married 36 years. And 35 years ago, she used to look at me and she would go, your green eyes are so pretty and they're so sexy. And now she looks at me and she puts one hand on each side of my cheek and looks real close into my eyes and she says, that hair on the end of your nose must be 2 inches long. So, things do change over 30-something years. They're the opposite. Some things change, don't they? Anyway. I thought it was a good joke. Jeff Oxford told it a lot better than I did. It was hilarious. Okay, let's start out with a prayer and then we'll get some favorite songs coming up. Lord, we thank you so much for loving us. We thank you for taking care of us. We thank you for protecting us and blessing us. We thank you for just loving us, Lord. We thank you for sending your Son down here on this earth as an example to us of how to love. Lord, we ask you to be with the sick folks that we have mentioned, or the folks like Jessica and Jennifer Pitcock and other folks that may be going through tough times right now. We are glad that Matt's parents are celebrating the 50th anniversary. We know that you rejoice in that as well, Lord. Lord, we are honored to be your children. We are honored to be related to the King. Thank you for loving us so very much. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. All right. One, you going to sing for me? favorite song? I won't be able to do as good as those two young men, but we'll pull it off.
We'll keep you for now.
Yeah, we should try it.
455.
Huh?
455.
455. 455.
I just opened the book for that.
Oh, this is,
We'll sing first and third, probably. No.
Me either.
No.
Me
That's
either.
like when peace like a river. Come on, another one.
I was ready for you to try and sing that.
517.
517. 517. Oh, yeah, we know this one. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful day. Day I'll never forget. After I've wandered in darkness away, Jesus, my Savior, I met. Oh, what a tender, compassionate friend. He never leave us alone. Shadows is swelling with joy, I am telling. He made all the darkness depart. And then down and glory fill my soul. When at the cross the sinner made me whole. My sins were washed away, and my life was turned to day. And then down and glory fill my soul. Now I have a hope that will surely endure after the passing of time. I have a future in heaven for sure. There is no vengeance of mine. And to know that wonderful day, when at the cross I believe, riches eternal and blessings eternal from His precious hand I receive. And came down and glory fill my soul. When at the cross the Savior made me whole. My sins were washed away, and my life was turned to day. And came down and glory fill my soul. Anyone else?
414.
414. 414. That's a good one. That's one we ought to all do. Sometimes we qualify this one, anywhere with Jesus as long as I don't have to teach class, or anywhere with Jesus as long as I don't have to do this. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go, anywhere in this world below. Anywhere without Him, there's choice would fade. Anywhere
to be in Acts chapter 10. There's a noisy bunch back there. We may need a parliamentarian. Acts 10. Acts 10. How y'all doing? 50 years. That's a long time. 50 years. Yeah. Geneva, and what's your name, sir? Mike. Geneva and Mike. Great. Where do y'all live at?
We currently live in Huntsville, Alabama.
Huntsville, Alabama. I got a son that lives there. Him, a son and daughter. Did you? Mine's still there. Mine's still there. That's fantastic. My aunt and uncle turned 50. They had a party in Rochelle, Texas. And I remember somebody said, told my uncle, said, that's a long time with one woman. He said, it'd been a lot longer without her. And my wife and I will be celebrating our 50th next year. We'll only be married 42 years, but George Burns had his 100th birthday when he was only like 88. So we're going to go ahead and do our 50th while we can still enjoy it next year. Y'all be ready. We're in Acts chapter 10. One of the song we sang a while ago, Anywhere with Jesus, I think really applies to this, what we've been looking at in this passage where Peter had this message from God while he was at Joppa on this rooftop, and God showed him these animals in this sheet or whatever it was, and told him, rise, kill, and eat. There's a message behind that. Now, previously we looked at the story where two different places in Matthew and Mark, I believe, where Jesus was criticized by the Pharisees because his apostles, his disciples, were eating without washing their hands first. And it was a tradition thing and all that, which, looking at what's the main message of that story, which I always kind of thought it was, Jesus said, what goes into a man from the outside doesn't defile him, it's what comes out of a man that defiles him. And I always looked at that as, this is Jesus saying, it doesn't matter what you eat, because there were these issues with the Jews and their ceremonial foods and things, the dietary restrictions that they had. But that wasn't what the subject was about that at all, was it? And we established from looking at what was asked and what was answered and what Jesus said at the end of it, the issue was they were eating without washing their hands. It wasn't what they were eating. And so it kind of gave me a different perspective on that whole exchange. And the point of that is looking at the context and looking at what's going on. We looked at part of this story last week in Acts 10 where Peter had this vision, and it's confusing to him. He had the vision 3 times. This sheet is lowered. Starting in, and let me read over it again right quick, because I want to ask you what the main message of this whole story is. Starting in verse 9, they were on their journey approaching the city. Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour to pray, which was about noon. I hope it wasn't in the middle of summertime, because it would have been very hot on a roof, in a flat roof like that. He became hungry, wanted something to eat, but while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens opened and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its 4 corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air, and there came a voice to him saying, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, by no means, Lord, for I've never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice came to him again a second time. What God has made clean, do not call common. This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. What's going on there? Well, we looked at last week, and I see this as this is something that actually happened, but it's similar to a parable in that here's a physical example of a spiritual message. The parable was a physical story, a story that was a common everyday thing that Jesus used to describe spiritual concepts, things that were far more abstract and difficult to understand. And the whole idea was to make it understandable for people that were dense like me. Here's the message. And we look at this and we see what's going to happen. And Cornelius is this guy who we talked about Cornelius to begin with, beginning of the chapter, but now Peter is, he finds out these guys come from Cornelius from Caesarea to Joppa, which is just up the coast, and because Cornelius had a vision to send for Peter. And so Peter goes down there and skip down to about verse 24. The following day they entered Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. When Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up, I too am a man." And as he talked with him, he went in and found many persons gathered, and he said to them, "You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or visit anyone of another nation, but God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean." How did God show him that? You know, that vision didn't say anything about Gentiles, did it? There wasn't any Gentiles in the sheet, right? So how did Peter get that? How did he make that connection? The Gentiles were typically referred to as common or unclean. That's why they weren't allowed to associate with them. Don't go to their house. Don't eat with them. Don't eat the same things that they eat. We have we're set apart. We're a special people. We're holy. And so we don't do the things that the Gentiles do. In the Sermon on the Mount, over and over, Jesus tells people, don't do this. This is what the Gentiles do. Don't do that. Don't be like the Gentiles. They do that. That was the way they looked at it. So Peter gets this, putting things together. Peter was a common fisherman, but he had common sense. He was able to put this message together. Because God said these animals are not to be called common or unclean, Gentiles are not to be called common or unclean anymore. We see that connection, right? Not that difficult. He says, "So when I was sent for, I came without objection. I asked them, 'Why you sent for me?'" Now, we're looking at the end of this story in our Sunday night class, but looking at it from what we know about this story, what happened to Peter, what happened with Cornelius, what's the message of this story? What's the main focus of this story? Salvation, don't leave the Gentiles out. Don't leave anybody out. Salvation's for Jews and Gentiles both.
I think it's interesting that in chapter 9, we've got the conversion of Paul. Now we've got Peter saying the Gentiles are okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I don't know what the chronological number of years it was between those two events, but not far.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got chapter 8, you've got the Ethiopian. Chapter 9, you've got Saul. Because his name, and that was a big deal because Saul was a common Jewish name. A lot of Jewish kids boys named Saul. And then you've got this situation. Well, we've been looking at these stories from the standpoint of, does this tell us anything about the assertion that was made that Christians today are required to follow the dietary restrictions found in Judaism, in the law of Moses? The story we looked at about the disciples not washing their hands before they ate didn't help us at all with that, did it? That wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about what they were eating. It was about the hands being washed because it was a traditional thing. We've also got this situation here where Peter says, "You know it's unlawful for me to come into a Gentile's house." That wasn't God's law. God didn't ever tell them, don't do that. That was a Jewish thing. The Jews had come up with, the Jewish leaders had come up with a lot of stuff that was outside of the confines of Judaism. But this is going to help us out. They're going to make us more holy. And we have that problem sometime today. We want to kind of go overboard. That's nothing new. When God gave Adam the rules in the garden, he said, don't eat the fruit of that tree. Remember when Satan came in Genesis 3 and ask Eve, are you not supposed to eat of the fruit of the garden? She said, we can eat all fruit, but we can't eat a fruit of that one tree. We can't even touch it. Why did she say we can't touch it? Did God say that? God didn't say that. God told, and he didn't tell Eve anything. He told Adam, y'all can't eat the fruit of that tree. Eve, maybe trying to help, if we don't touch it, we won't eat it, so we're going to make a rule we don't touch it. Well, God's rule is Eve's rule. Well, the Pharisees have been doing the same thing for a good while. The Jewish leaders have been making these rules. But the question here, looking at, does this story help us with the question of whether we're still required to follow dietary restrictions found in Old Testament law? Does it? Anybody got a shot at that? You've got a situation here where under the law of Moses, if something was common or unclean, they couldn't eat it. Pigs, shellfish, whether it had a chewed or could and had cloven hoofs and all that stuff we read. So the common things they weren't allowed to eat them. Christianity has come along, and there's new rules with it, but they were still, the Jewish people who accepted Christianity at that point were still following those same dietary restrictions. And they were still preaching the gospel at this point just to Jews. They weren't preaching out yet. Even though, when you go back to Acts 1, where Jesus said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be my witnesses. Remember where they were supposed to witness? Jerusalem, all Judea, Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. That's supposed to, and they took that, I think they would have taken that to mean, because nothing's happened with Gentiles up to this point, right? I think they would have taken that to mean, okay, the Jews in Jerusalem, the Jews in all Judea, the Jews in Samaria, the Jews all the way to the ends of the earth, because some of these Jews were all over the world at Pentecost, right? I think they misunderstood that on purpose to mean God doesn't really want us to take this to Gentiles. So Peter ends up with this vision that says, okay, you're going to have to understand this, Peter. This is not just for Jews, it's for Gentiles too, and that's what the whole message is about. But does it help with the dietary restrictions thing? I think it does, in a way. Not directly, but indirectly. Just like a parable, a common thing, a common everyday, I'll say you probably shouldn't use that, a normal, not unusual thing, everyday event, Jesus would use in a parable to prove spiritual things. Well, if he's going to use, it's okay to eat common animals to make the point that you need to preach the gospel to Gentiles, then what's the premise that we have to have in order to make that work? What's the premise that we have to have about the animals that are common or unclean? It has to be okay to eat them now, right? It won't work as a message to take the gospel to the Gentiles if you still can't eat those animals. Because if you still can't eat those animals, Peter hasn't gotten a message to take the gospel to Cornelius. But he did get that. So what Peter understood was, I get it. God's saying, because it's okay to eat the animals that we thought were still banned, then it must be okay to take the gospel to the Gentiles. How else can you make that connection, right? And this is not the point of the story. The point of the story is, the main point of the story here is, you take the gospel to everybody, not just the Jews. But in order to get there, you have to go through in this way God set it up, you have to go through the animals to get there. And in order to go through the animals and get to the conclusion you want, you have to understand that everything that was in that sheet was okay to eat. If it wasn't, you can't get to the right conclusion. Now the theory, the claim made against that is that when we read this where it says, Peter heard this voice, said, rise, Peter, kill and eat. The assertion is what God meant was rise and choose clean animals and eat them. God never told Peter here to kill and eat the unclean or common animals. But if you use that, then you don't get to the Gentiles. You never get to the Gentiles. Yes, sir.
Very obvious. Part of that, Peter, Peter said,
It's obvious that what?
I've never eaten anything unclean.
Yeah.
Then he turns around and tells them, well, what I have clean is clean.
You can't call it that anymore. So that argument doesn't work. I mean, obviously that's not going to work. The main point there is not about the food restrictions, but in a roundabout way, it does tell us something about those. Flip over to Colossians chapter 2. We're going to go to the next section on this. Unless anybody's got anything else they want to throw in about that. Yes, sir.
Later, at the Jerusalem conference, when they got there, what they were trying to tell the Gentiles, they didn't say, don't eat these animals, they said, don't, eat anything with blood.
Yeah.
And the things that they told them, which was kind of a surprise to what most of us would have thought the conclusion they reached.
Yeah.
But there was nothing there about eating clean or unclean animals.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of assumed that it was okay there.
Yeah.
And that's just a few years later.
And that was it. The Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 is all about this. It's not very long after that. Right at the end of Paul and Barnabas' first missionary journey, they come back and they find, we've got these issues. The Gentiles are wanting to know if they have to follow all these rules of Judaism. And so they got together and said, let's talk about it. What rules are we going to make them follow? Dietary restrictions weren't any part of it except for the blood thing. Don't eat anything with the blood in it. Don't eat anything strangled or with the blood still in it. Only thing about food. So if God's requirements were still according to the Mosaic law, they would have mentioned that there. I didn't even think about that example, but yeah, it's a good one.
Peter had a problem with this.
Yeah.
Here and even later, when
Yeah.
Paul had to correct him.
Yeah.
Fully accepting the Gentiles, he had a little bit of a problem with it. Later in his life, no, but
Yeah.
for a while he did. So
Yeah.
it was just kind of a hard lesson for him.
That's one of the good things about Peter is some of his faults, because it gives me a look at somebody that's as great a guy as he was. He messed up sometimes, and we all do. It's an encouraging thing. That thing was where it wasn't about what they were eating; it was about who they were eating with. Peter would eat with the Gentiles when the Jewish folks weren't around, but when the Jews showed up, he wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. What kind of message does that show? That's not a family thing. That's not a solidarity thing. Colossians chapter 2, and this is another one of those, but there's a part of this that I think applies to the food issue. But there's more to it than that. The church in Colossae had some evidently some issues that Paul's dealing with in this letter, and the context around the food issue gives us a basis for understanding what really Paul's trying to get across here, and whether the part of this passage, what applies to food here, helps us with this question or not. So we're going to start, I think probably in verse 16 is the best place to start. Paul's trying to get some basic stuff across, and in the first part of chapter 2, he equates baptism in the new covenant with circumcision in the old covenant, the way that a mark is made on us that shows that we belong to God, and what he says in that prior to verse 16 will help us understand the context for verse 16 and following, where he does get into some of the food issues, because the question of whether we're to follow dietary restrictions of Old Testament law isn't just about dietary restrictions. If you're going to follow any of the law, you got to follow all the law. Well, if you're going to follow the dietary restrictions that are required in the Mosaic law, then you also have to follow all the other rules. You have to do the tithing. You have to observe all the feast days. You have to make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. You have to sacrifice your lamb and observe Passover the correct way. No leaven at all in your home during the week of Passover. Throw all that out. You have all these things that you've got to do, because if you're going to follow part of the law, you have to follow all the law, right? So when we get to the food thing, he's already been addressing some of the other stuff, because he's already addressing this circumcision issue, and the main thing they used as an example of Judaism, Mosaic law. And he deals with that along with some other things, Stoicism, philosophies, which would have been quite a problem in places like Colossae, where they had a lot of Gentiles who had come from worldly beliefs into Christianity, and now they're trying to make these distinctions and separate things out, so that they need to understand Christ is the one thing. It's kind of like in the churches of Galatia, where Paul said, if you mix Christianity with Judaism, if you mix Christianity with anything at all, then you end up with nothing. It's not we'll make it better by adding this a little bit. No, it ruins it completely. Well, that's the same kind of thing. So if you go back to verse 8, Paul says, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. Anything that competes with your relationship with Jesus is going to be a problem. Pretty simple, whatever it is. He says, for in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you've been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. There's obviously a connection between baptism and circumcision there. Verse 13, you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. You remember he talked about when people were crucified at the time that Jesus was, they typically would put a sign above them on the cross that told what their crime was. And you could go by, if you wanted to, you could go by wherever they were crucifying people, and okay, this one was a murderer, and this one spilt the milk, or whatever, here's what they did. What was Jesus' sign? What did it say? King of the Jews. And the Pharisees didn't like that. They told Pilate, hey, don't put King of the Jews. Say, this man said he was a King of the Jews. And Pilate said, well, that's just the way it is. I've said what I said. I'm not going to change that. And in that, I believe Pilate unknowingly made this statement about who Jesus really was. But Paul's referring to that situation here when he gets to this part where Jesus nailed something to the cross. Sammy? You got your hand up. You have to say something now. I don't make the rules. Okay. All right. There's a connection here. In going to the cross, Jesus nailed our debt to the cross along with its, what kind of demands does it say? What kind of demands? You have to look at the word. Legal. What does he mean by legal demands? What's he referring to? What's Paul constantly talking about? Especially if you wrote Hebrews and you go through Hebrews, there's got to be a disconnect between Judaism and Christianity. You can't have both. You people, you Jews who have been baptized into Christ, you're thinking about going back to Judaism, you can't do that. You can't be saved that way. And you can't mix them. You can't pretend to be one and actually be the other. It's got to be a 100% deal. The legal demands refers to the law of Moses, which up until Jesus went to the cross, the law of Moses had nobody that fulfilled it, nobody that was then authorized to replace it. Because of Jesus' life, because of the way he lived, his sinlessness, and being willing to be the sacrifice, he fulfilled the law of Moses, nailed our debt, because our debt would never have been paid if Jesus hadn't done that. The people before, even the righteous people, we read up in Hebrews 11, their debt would not have been paid unless Jesus went to the cross. So he took all that debt, nailed it to the cross with his legal demands, legal being part of the law of Moses, and we don't owe it anymore because of that. And so if that is gone, then we can't live by the rules of it. Not the circumcision rule, not the tithing rule, not the feast days rule, not the can't wear linen with anything else or mix two kinds of material in your clothes. Y'all be careful not to mix cotton and polyester. You can't even hardly do that anymore in the same garment. They had restrictions on what cloths they could wear together. I have no idea why, but that was part of the law. If you're going to follow any of the law, you have to follow all of it. That was gone when Jesus went to the cross. That was nailed to the cross there. So Paul's making that point up to here. This he satisfied now on his cross. Verse 15, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. And the rulers and authorities he's talking about there are not physical rulers and authorities. We looked at those terms being used for Satan and the demons that work with him. So defeating the Romans or whoever was in charge at the time wasn't a problem. The issue was defeating Satan at the cross. So when we get to verse 16, we get to actually where he's going to talk about the issue that we're trying to study. But there's a precedent coming up to it that he's kind of set things up here. He says, therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with the growth that is from God. So let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. Why would he have to tell these people that? Don't let anybody tell you you're wrong because of a festival, a new moon, or a Sabbath. Do y'all celebrate the new moon? Some cultures still do. Definitely did back at that time. And I've read some about the English back before they were called English, Britons and all. They had all kinds of pagan festivals. They had Samhain and Beltane and all kinds of strange things that they did. 1st of May, they would plant like a big telephone pole. They would decorate it with flowers and stuff on May Day, big deal. Different things like that. Paul says, don't let anyone look down on you for celebrating festivals, new moons, Sabbath. What does he say there? Why would he be having to explain that to these people in Colossae? Festival, new moon, or Sabbath? Festival, new moon, or Sabbath? Who had festivals and who celebrated new moons and who observed Sabbath? Jews observed Sabbath, right? And Jews had festivals and pagans had festivals. And I don't think Jews did the new moon thing. Paul's kind of lumping everybody together there, isn't he? Everybody that had these things that they did that were suddenly now, they didn't do anymore if they were Christians, right? We don't treat Sabbath the same way that they did then, that they were required to under the law of Moses. So what's Paul really saying here about those things? If the law of Moses is not what we're supposed to follow anymore, the dietary, if the dietary restrictions are gone, if all the rules from that are gone, then why does he say, don't let anybody, what did he say, disparage you? What word did he say? Pass judgment on you. Don't let anybody pass judgment on you in question of food or drink regarding a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. So it's okay to celebrate those things? If I decided to have a party at the next new moon and invited y'all to come out, it's a moon party, we're going to sit in my backyard and drink iced tea and look up at the moon, which a new moon party you wouldn't be able to see it because you can't see the moon at all. But let's say I started on a full moon party, you could see that one. I don't know, that's a pretty poor name, isn't it, Larry, new moon? Because when there's a new moon, you don't see the moon at all. We could have a Gibbous moon party. I like that word. I imagine gibbons running around on the moon. But would that be okay? Would that be something wrong with having a full moon party at my house? If I wanted to have it as a religious rite, that would be a problem, wouldn't it? But if I want to have a Thursday party because it's Thursday, did you know, what were our planets named after, by the way? Anybody know what our planets were named after? You got the Neptune, god of the sea. You got Mars, god of war. You've got Saturn, god of cars. I don't know what they are. All of them were named after like Roman or Greek gods. That's where the names came from. Where did our days of the week come from? They came from our planets. Saturday, Saturn. Thursday, I don't know who that's after. The point is, when you say, I'll be there Saturday, if you've got this secular mindset, pagan mindset, you're thinking, Saturn's day. We call Sunday, we call the Lord's Day. They're thinking, if they're a pagan, at that time especially, Saturday, Saturn's day, the god Saturn. What if I have a Saturday party? If I don't do it religiously, it doesn't matter. I can have all the Saturday party I want. But if I do it religiously, then we have an issue. If it's to observe something spiritually. So there's a big difference there. And so Paul's trying to make a point. People are going to look down on you. And it seems like everybody likes to point fingers, but it's human nature, and people were the same then as they are now. And I say, oh, well, Larry does this or that, but I'm doing stuff wrong too. In these churches of Asia and over in there, we had Jewish people. People came from a Jewish background. People came from a pagan background. They were all Christians now. Some of them had left Judaism. Some of them had left worshiping Mithras and Ra and all these. So they've had to leave things that they knew all their lives behind to become Christians. But some of those things were national holidays. Passover for a Jew was still Passover even after they became a Christian, so they're still celebrating Passover, even though the Jews following Judaism celebrated Passover as a religious holiday. The Jews who had become Christians celebrated Passover like 4th of July. Freedom. That's what it's about. Big difference in how you look at it. When I was preaching at London, Texas, not London, England, I started to have cards made up to my name and preacher London, and not tell people London, Texas. There's only about 20 people live in London, Texas. There was a couple that sat on the front row and scowled at me the whole time. They were a great old couple. They were like 120 years old. And they watched me like this. And this old couple, I don't know how long they'd been married, it was 50 years or so. They studied the Bible together every day at their kitchen table. You didn't come up with something from the Bible they hadn't read. When we got to this issue, I really loved them, they're great people. The issue came up about the Jews having to leave Judaism behind in order to become Christians, and something came up about the main thing that Paul refers to as a representative of Judaism is circumcision. And they said, and one of this old couple said, well, you can't do that. I said, well, why not? You can't allow people to have their kids circumcised. I said, well, if they're Jewish, if they were Jewish. And I said, well, what if a young Jewish couple converted to Christianity and they're not practicing Judaism anymore, they're Christians, and they have a child and it's a boy and they want to have him circumcised, would you tell them they can't do it? And they said, no. we can't bring that just because it was a religious thing then. As long as I'm not observing it religiously now, it's okay. If I'm observing it religiously, and that's the point Paul's trying to get across here. We've got these things that we used to do as religious that God required. We still do some of them, as long as we don't do them. So don't let anybody pass judgment on you in questions of festivals, new moon, Sabbath. The Jews that had become Christians and observed the day of rest on Saturday were leaving themselves open to be criticized for practicing Judaism, even if they weren't doing it as a religious thing. I just want to take a nap on Saturday. Why can't I take a nap? Well, you used to practice Judaism, so you can't take a nap on Saturday anymore because it looks like you're doing the Sabbath. Paul said, don't let them tell you that. You pagans, if you want to have a party on Saturday and call it a party just for fun instead of a party to honor the god Saturn, you go ahead and have your party, don't let anybody criticize you. That's what Paul's saying here. If it's not done religiously, it's okay. Don't do that reason anymore. But the food and drink goes along with that. And he wasn't just aiming this at Jewish people either. The Jews were required they couldn't eat pork, they couldn't eat shellfish, and they had a very complicated relationship with animals that had chewed cuds and had cloven hooves. I can't remember the rules on that. Could they eat those now? Was it all right to eat those now? What about me if I don't like shellfish? Do I have to eat it? But like we have a fellowship meal. Y'all call it a potluck. And somebody brings shrimp. And I'm a guy who came from Judaism, and we've got Gentiles there, like Peter. Paul chastised Peter for not eating with the Gentiles. You're not going on with it. Let's say I skip the shrimp. I just don't like shrimp. And somebody looks at me and says, well, he's doing that because he's Jewish and he's practicing Judaism again because he won't eat the shellfish. Shrimp is shellfish, right? Does it qualify as shellfish? It has a shell. Is that fair? I think there were things like that going on here. Maybe not that specifically, but something going on here because people like to point fingers. And so Paul's trying to get this point across. If we're not practicing Judaism as a religion, then it's okay. You can still take your nap on Saturday. You can still avoid the shellfish if you don't like to eat it, right?
It goes back to the original statement you made, it's not one that goes in,
Mhm. Yeah.
He's saying that it's not the eating anyway, that they were set aside for a particular purpose, but it's what's in your heart.
Yeah, I see.
It's the God that
Absolutely.
counts. Nothing else counts like that does.
Absolutely. That's the bottom line. It goes on, though. We're not done there. He says these things are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Here's the important part. It's, is Christ in your heart? That's the whole thing. Let no one disqualify you insisting on asceticism, which was a big thing back in the early church. Asceticism was a big thing. I'm going to give away all my possessions. I'm going to go live in the desert. I'm going to subsist on whatever people drop as their hiking by, and that's it. One guy, I can't remember his name. The guy lived on a pole, like 40-foot tall pole, for years on a little platform, and he lived on this platform. Asceticism. I'm going to do without everything. And there are religious groups that require their clergy to eschew all material wealth. Take a vow of poverty. I'm not going to. And the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, but there are good things that can be done with money too, as long as we use it properly. So going overboard is usually not the way to go. Let no one disqualify you insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, which worship of angels was a problem during the early church. There's some other references to it. People got the idea that angels needed to be worshipped along with God, and no, that's not the way this works. God is the one to be worshipped. Going on in detail about visions pumped up without reason by a sensuous mind and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with the growth that is from God. Who's the head that we're supposed to be paying attention to? Jesus. Jesus is the head of the church. Bottom line, pay attention to Jesus. That's the whole thing. Verse 20, if with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? And this is the interesting part. Here's your regulations you should not submit to. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used. Perishable foods, for example, according to human precepts and teachings. Why are you still doing that? These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they have no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. I want to talk about that just a little bit next time. We don't have time now, and then we're going to go to 1 Timothy 4 and wrap this whole thing up about the food issue, and then we'll move on to some other confusing thing. Bow with me and we'll close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word, for your guidance, for allowing us to be together as Christians, have fellowship together, part of your family, and study your word together. We're thankful for the many blessings that you give us every day, but most especially for your Son, the gift that gives us the hope of spending an eternity with you in heaven. Guide us, watch over us, and help us to be the examples you want us to be in this world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.